Well, I've been asked to speak on the subject of adornment, specifically modesty. And I would say to you that it's probably, as the first paragraph states on your handout, most difficult issue I faced in my years of ministry, which is now 47. Started full-time ministry February 1st of 1976. In those 47 years, probably nothing has been more difficult to discuss than adornment for men and women. There's more than three issues to consider, but three issues that often come to the forefront in attire are modesty, identity, and what we're associating with. The Bible clearly states that our attire is to be modest. But then, of course, the question comes back, well, what's modest? History documents that attire has been gender specific. Very interesting quote by a couple of people. I've read numerous books on adornment. And I want to let you know honestly where I'm coming from. When I was in college, I went to a college where ladies were required to wear skirts, dresses, down to the middle of their knee or below the knee. I can't remember exactly. But I wanted to know personally if there was any legitimacy to that. And it began a journey that started in 1976 and has continued to this day. I just checked the internet today to see what it takes to be an expert in a field. And they say that if a person reads 3 books on a subject, they are perceived to be an expert. That statement is misleading. You might be perceived to be an expert, and the reason you're perceived to be an expert is because nobody reads anymore. Certainly not a whole book. But I don't think you'd want a surgeon to do surgery on you if they'd read 3 books. So there's a lot more to being an expert than that, but I have read many books on this subject. I don't know of anybody personally that has read more. I've read books written by people that have read a whole lot more books than I have concerning the matter of adornment, the history of it, the psychology behind it, why we dress the way we do. And this quote from Lawrence Langner and Julian Robinson, who co-authored a book for almost the whole of recorded history. Up until the 1960s, no effort was spared to make the clothes of the two sexes as different as possible. They said another way, on another page, we have dressed our men in clothes labeled male and women in clothes labeled female for thousands of years until the 1960s. It's only in the last 50 years, based on when they wrote their book, that we even had a thought of trying to obliterate distinction between genders. That to me is a big issue because it's become a big issue in our culture today. And it's something that I'm not talking about specifically, but comments are going to creep in because the gender neutralization of our culture is devastating us. I have a book that's written by a liberal Democrat. That's her position professed in her book. She's a liberal Democrat. It's her political position, and she is a feminist. And she wrote a book, The War Against Boys. And the whole premise of her book, and she got a lot of attack from her little liberal friends, is that masculinity in our culture is the greatest disaster of the feminist movement. We no longer have men that are men. Men have lost their sense of purpose because of the Women's Lib movement. It's a serious issue. I've been talking about that specific issue since the 1980s, and I might as well have had people laughing out loud and slapping their knees at how ridiculous the statements were I made, such as a day's coming when men will wear earrings. That was a knee slapper for people. Days coming when women will be tattooing themselves. Now, I'm not speaking to you about whether I'm in favor of these things or opposed to them. I'm telling you that there is a huge move to get rid of gender identity. And that does affect then the way that we look at clothes. My primary subject today is modesty, but another one is association. Clothes associate us with specific agendas, specific groups, specific ideals, specific morals. And unfortunately, and this is important for me, to me, that you understand this, unfortunately, if I just give you Bible verses that talk about these things, most Christians, I've been teaching on this for 50 years myself. So most Christians will kind of discard it, which is scary. You're using the Bible, but they discard it because they see something different in the world. And so what I have done is I've combined the principles of the Bible with multitudes of authors and fashion designers and politicians who have passed laws and have propagated certain things in reference to our culture's mindset concerning clothes. And specifically in reference to modesty, because it is a problem. Did you know, and I'm going to say some things pretty pointedly here just so that we wake up. Did you know that after great plagues, such as the plague in England, devastating wars where a huge number of the male population were killed off, at least 4 different nations passed laws that women must dress modestly. They passed laws. Now, why did they do that? Because they know that the way a woman dresses affects the way a guy thinks. And they wanted babies. Plain and simple. And so they passed laws. I will not read, I haven't delved into that. I'm actually quoting another author that referenced this. And I have not delved into it because I don't think I need my mind focused on that and what they told ladies to do so that they could procreate. But the point is, the way we present ourselves really matters. I'm supposed to be done at what time? Is it 10:02 or?
Oh, it's okay.
2 o'clock?
You're fine.
No, I've heard about you. You come up and you say, "Thank you very much, Pastor. That was really good." And I'm still in the middle of what I'm saying. So. I don't want that to happen. We need to acknowledge that men aren't all twisted, lust-ridden, trying to choose words that are appropriate, but you get my point. God has wired women and men differently. And women respond to speech, men respond to appearance. It's not all that women and men respond to, but that is the way God has wired them. And so you can read in Proverbs chapter 7, the mindset of the fornicacious, adulterous woman that's described pretty graphically in Proverbs chapter 7. And you will see what ladies can do to get the attention of guys. And it's not just the way they dress, it's their body language, it's the way they use their eyes, and it's the way they use their speech. And so this is an issue that we should pay attention to. So as I look at it this morning, I recognize that many sincere, godly Christian ladies want to wear what pleases God, but they fail to be honest about what the Bible says. They just struggle to accept that. The Bible obviously gives us clear statements concerning our attire. We'll look at some of them, but there's still room for liberty. You don't have to come to the exact conclusions I've come to. You have not read about this as much as I have. But I do know the intent of fashion designers. It's very clear, it's clearly stated over and over. It's not something that I'm making up as a Baptist preacher. It's just clearly stated. And Sometimes I do get a little frustrated because the people I have the hardest time convincing are Christian ladies. I can talk about this in other settings and people know it's true, but Christian ladies, well, we kind of resist because we have our minds made up as to how we want to dress. And of course, if any guy has a problem, then it's his issue, not yours. So I'm saying we surely should, if we're God-honoring people, want to be God-focused, not people-focused. We should want to be safe, not sorry. And we should be careful and not careless in how we adorn ourselves, how we present ourselves in public. Notice the 3 goals of modesty. These are not the only 3 goals, but 3 that I think affect us. The word clothing implies the idea of envelope, enveloping. So that is covering, completely concealing. The purpose of that concealing is to safely deliver yourself to your husband. I sometimes am disappointed how ladies dress at weddings. Here they are committing themselves to a man for their lifetime, and they expose themselves in ways that is pretty embarrassing. And I'm simply saying that God's intent is that we keep ourselves for our husband for life. That is his desire. I know it doesn't always work out that way, but that's his desire. And we should certainly want to honor the principles that the Bible gives, and there are some very specific principles in the New Testament. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, and I've got the Greek here because you need to know that words mean something, not trying to show off my intelligence. But one thing that we're supposed to do is wear modest apparel. That's kosmios. It's the arrangement of the universe. Well-arranged, seemly, modest, moderate. Shouldn't be anything extravagant, anything suggestive about what we're wearing. Letter B, women adorn themselves with shamefacedness. This is the most powerful word, I believe, and I'm in 1 Timothy chapter 2 technically, but it's the most powerful word, I believe, that pertains to women's adornment, that she is to adorn herself with shamefacedness. It's 3 words put together, 3 concepts put together. Your countenance, blushing, and steadfastness. 3 words put together. In other words, what it is saying is what you wear today shouldn't be any different than what was worn 50 years ago or 100 years ago, because a woman would blush if she dressed that way. Now we know we have moved a long way from where we once were. Now every culture has had a way, all the way back in history, for women to adorn themselves to attract the attention of men. So I'm not ignorant of that. And a fashion designer's position and purpose is to constantly change the focus of how a lady dresses to draw attention to a different part of her anatomy. They do it on purpose. It's not as clearly obvious in the cycle as it used to be back in the 70s and 80s when I was first looking at it. It was very obvious. You go from a micro mini skirt to a long flowing skirt but a low top, to a bare back, to something that emphasizes the bottom, the buttocks. And they would just cycle through it. You could see it. Very obvious, about every 5-6 years. One person said, I'll see if I can find this real quickly. Declared purpose of fashion designers. This is again a quote. People who study this look at it. To allure and disarm the male. They declare that ambivalent clothing, like hypocrites, pretends to conceal the wearer but fails successfully. Pretends to conceal the wearer but fails successfully. In other words, fails just enough to get a guy's attention. No matter what focus they are in their design at that time, they fail successfully to properly keep a lady modest. And so, my point here isn't to pick on any specific form of dress, but to help you realize that there is deliberate, open, communicated intent. If you read the statements of fashion designers concerning any new design, you will basically never say them that outfit is totally modest. They will say that outfit is subtly masculine. Or they'll say that outfit is subtly sexy. And they will say that that outfit is obnoxious, disgusting. They'll use those words. Because some go way beyond the boundaries, and there's purpose with this. They go way beyond common accepted social boundaries to see how far women will go, and then they'll back off. And then they'll go way beyond a boundary in another area. The micro miniskirt was one of those experiments in the 60s. And a lot of women put on pantsuits. My mother was one of them. Always wore dresses. But she put on a pantsuit because she wasn't going to be wearing a micro miniskirt. And that is what fashion designers are doing on purpose. It's not by accident. So that word in 1 Timothy 2:9 is pretty significant. If we would have been ashamed 50 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and if it would have brought a blush to our face, and if it's not steadfast, if we're insensitive to what we used to be sensitive to, there's a problem. In other words, our barriers, our boundaries are being broken down. Letter C, women adorn themselves with sobriety. This is another very interesting word, but it means basically to curb or to be safe. It, of course, deals with curbing the mind, but when it's talking about clothing, it's got to be to curb the passions or the desires or the impulses. And so there is a responsibility that when we adorn ourselves that we are curbing. We are curbing, not trying to solicit attention. I literally saw this one time. I think I was in a mall. I don't remember, but I was in the middle of digging into all this and figuring it out. And I just watched guys as women walk by in the mall. It's unfortunate because guys do need to learn to curb and control their eyes. One lady walked by and she was obnoxious. And the guy who was looking at her, she turns, "What are you looking at?" Well, duh. It's like, come on. You dress that way on purpose, and then you act irritated when somebody notices. Yeah, so that word in 1 Timothy 2:9 of being sober or discreet in Titus means to be sound, to be careful, to curb, to guard, to control. Letter D, teach younger women to be chaste. This is a huge problem in our culture. It means to venerate holiness. Venerate means to honor or to regard or have respect for holiness. A woman should be dressing not only to venerate God's holiness, but to venerate her husband. A woman's attire should show her honor to her husband. That there should be no desire to attract the attention of another guy. Now, I've taught this long enough and often enough that I've had ladies come to me afterward, taught this in a larger setting where there's men and women in a large congregation. And I'll have women come to me and say, "Yeah, I used to dress like that, and I knew what I was doing." I've had many people come to me and say, "Well, ladies don't realize, they don't know." But I've had enough ladies come to me and say, "I used to dress that way and I knew exactly what I was doing because I wanted to feel powerful, that I could control a man." I'm not saying that's the only reason that ladies dress that way. But they wanted to feel that power of being able to, in some way, control a man's emotions. So I'm just saying we need to be conscious, we need to be honest, we ought to venerate holiness. If we're not married, we ought to save ourselves for the husband that God will give us. If we are married, we ought to save ourselves for our husband. I've done a lot of marriage counseling in my years, and one of the things that comes up at times is the relationship between a man and a woman in marriage, and husbands that are so frustrated that their wives reveal themselves in public and hide themselves in private. That's backwards, ladies. I'm just telling you, it's backwards. Seduce your husband, it's okay, but not other guys. Not other guys. And so I'm just, like I said, I'm just going to be straight up. We have a tendency to let down our guard in public, and unfortunately sometimes to guard ourselves in private. Who's adorning this verse is interesting. I bring it up because there are certain religious backgrounds that hang on to this, that you shouldn't fix your hair, cut your hair, wear gold or jewelry. But you notice there's three things that it says: don't be the outward adorning of the plaiting of the hair, the wearing of gold, or putting on of apparel. If you teach that this verse says you can't wear jewelry, you can't fix your hair, then it also teaches you can't wear clothes. And we know that's not true, yes? Do we know that's not true? Okay, so the point is what? Don't let that be your beauty. Don't let that be what attracts people to you. Let it be the hidden man of the heart. And it goes on and says that. Let your heart, let the real person that you are, every person in this room today is beautiful. God said so. If you allow him to govern yourself. If you allow him to be the focus of your attention. And so that's what that is. Let it be the hidden man of the heart. Don't put your focus on adornment. I want to get to this next section because now this comes from secularists. And I want to say something in reference to this. All people that write about clothing that are secular, maybe not all, but the ones that I've read and studied, it seems pretty evident that they're not religious. In other words, they believe in evolution. And some of them state that very clearly. That somehow this single cell amoeba developed into fish that got legs and walked and turned into apes and became human beings. Now here's where I'm going with this. This is very important, and therefore it was man's idea at some point in the evolutionary process to put on clothes. If that's your thinking, that opens the door for you to do all kinds of things with clothing. If you think it's man's idea to wear clothes, then you can attack some of the results of wearing clothes and go whatever direction you want to. And so sometimes they say, for thousands of years, there's been gender distinction, and they followed up, and that's unfortunate. No, God designed clothes. God came up with the idea of clothes. And there's a book, and I don't know that's in the public library anymore. I got it out of the Martinsville Library. But it was just a book. It was a bigger book, and it had what would be called plates. But every page had probably 9 couples pictured on every page. And this was hundreds of pages, going all the way back as far in history as they had any record of clothing. And those plates, man and woman side by side, made it very obvious which one was the man and which one was the woman. Okay? But we as secular humanists have this idea that clothing somehow hinders or inhibits the role of the woman and the role of the man. It's not the case. I've had people throw at me, well, people in the Bible were the same thing. No, they didn't. If you pay attention to reading the Bible, they could tell at a long distance that a lady was coming or a man was coming. There was clear distinction between the genders in every culture, every society, throughout all history. What this diagram on the second page is showing you is that there are 2 extremes from a human perspective in putting on clothes. One is I wear clothes for social acceptance. The other is I wear clothes for sexual appeal. That's the left-hand side of that chart. This is human secularists. So if a woman wears clothing for social appeal, then she goes to the other extreme in the next category, and she puts her focus on the clothes she wears. She has the most expensive. She has the clothes that are by the most expensive designer. And having chosen her clothes, it's about her. It's about self and how people will perceive me. And quite frankly, when you go with a $15,000 dress to a baseball game, it causes people to be a little bit disgusted. Who does she think she is? But then you come to the last one, and it produces what the author says is a great conflict in ladies. What part of my body do I want to accent, or what part of my body is the most appealing or most attractive in this type of garment? If you start from the other perspective, I want to be seductive, then your focus is on your body, not your clothes. Your focus is on others, how they will look at me in a way that would attract them to me, and the focus is to produce desire. But it still comes to the same conflict. What part of my body am I comfortable with, and what part of my body am I choosing to display? Now, that's a secular view, and that's just one of so many things that secularists understand about how we purpose to choose our clothing. For a Christian, it may not show up real well on your sheet, but you ought to draw a line right down the middle between those two lines, and there ought to be a steady, focused purpose on one thing: modesty. And that's what the words say there: modesty, 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 modesty. Modest in expense, not extravagant. Modest in appearance, not alluring. And the purpose should be modest, and the focus should be the inner man of the heart, not the outward physical features. So I've got 11 biblical admonitions that apply to clothing and modesty. Abstain from all appearance of evil. All appearance of evil. There should not be any question in anybody's mind why you're dressing that way. Well, in reference to trying to allure the eyes of the opposite gender. Make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. Neither your desire to control men, nor their desire to see. One man said to me, if any man's honest, the more flesh they see, the better they like it. It's just all there is to it. And believe me, clothes are effectively revealing flesh today. Very effectively. Let not then your good be evil spoken of. Is wearing clothes good? I would say yes. God's the one that came up with the idea and clothed Adam and Eve in the garden. But don't let that good be evil spoken of. Flee off also youthful lust, but follow righteousness, focusing really more on the second half than the first half. Do what's right. Just do what's right. Why do we have to be accepted by our peers in this matter when God has given us clear instruction? Whosoever looketh at a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in her heart. No lady should desire that. No lady should desire that. Job said, I've made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? Put that in there because I teach this sometimes to mixed groups. Guys do have a responsibility. We don't deny that. There met him a woman with the attire of a harlot. Let not thine heart decline to her ways. Go not astray in her paths. Enter not into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of evil men. Avoid it, pass not by it, turn from it, and pass away. There's a lot of different ways these verses could apply, but one way they definitely apply is to how we clothe ourselves. Take heed lest any man by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. If you study 1 Corinthians chapter 8, you will find that there is absolute responsibility on the part of any Christian to live their life in a way that doesn't cause others to stumble, doesn't cause others to make decisions that would cause them to be ungodly. There's no way to get around it. The Apostle Paul says, as long as I live, I won't eat meat. He was talking about meat offered to idols because it was something that caused people to stumble in his culture. Anything wrong with having a hamburger? I don't think so. But he was talking about the hamburger that was sold at the meat market, which was already used to worship idols, heathen gods. And he said, I'm not going to buy my food at the fast food restaurant. I'm not going to do it. I'm not talking about McDonald's. I'm talking about the fast food restaurant back there. It was already cooked. It already been used as a sacrifice. It was already cooked. All they had to do is pick it up and eat it. All things are not expedient. Yeah, boy. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. If Jesus, by surprise, stopped by your house, and I'm using house because you may, with absolute liberty, dress any way you want to. Would you want to go change your clothes? I'm not saying in your house you have to dress the way you would in public, but I'm saying it becomes a very quick barometer if we're honest with ourselves. Say, man, I wouldn't want Jesus to see me. Well, then maybe you better not go out to the mailbox either. I'm just trying to help you. You know, we justify things. We run to the store quick, but you know, we're really not dressed properly. So we've got some questions for you. There's so much I could talk about, but if you have any questions you want to ask, or if you want to just discuss these questions among yourself, the encouragement I have at the bottom of page 3, dress with gender distinction as much as possible. We need to get back to masculine and feminine and be proud of our femininity and our masculinity. Dress with moderation in accessories, makeup, hair, and clothing. Seek to buy dresses, skirts, tops that are safe. In any position, bending over in front of somebody, sitting down, whatever. If you find yourself pulling at your top, tugging at your hemline, trying to pull your top down to meet the skirt that you have on, you're not safe. And you know it. Your conscience is telling you it's not safe. Be involved in activities that allow you to act like a lady. I don't need to get going on this, but I find churches and youth groups change activities so that girls can be involved, and I'm simply saying, well, that's probably good, because what happens is girls say, well, I've got to wear this if I go to that activity. Well, we don't have that activity. It's just the way we do it here. We don't have that activity. Ladies should be able to dress as ladies, and men should be able to dress as men and be involved in things that are appropriate. Seek to wear outfits that do not reveal the underwear. Shouldn't have to say it, but I'll tell you what, you sure got to say it anymore. My wife rides a motorcycle with me, though I don't have a motorcycle anymore. She goes downhill skiing with me. She's always done it in a modest dress. Just where I'm at. Doesn't mean that you got to be there. That's where I'm at. It is possible. She rides a bike, we ride. She put 3,000 miles on one bicycle she had. It's always dressed as a lady. It's not impossible. It's not as complicated as we'd like to make it. Questions, comments, or you can just get up here. I mean, it's okay. You can come up here and kick me out. I was kind of looking forward to that. I was trying to go just a little bit past my time. Yes?
I just wanted to thank you for your influence in Martinsville. I just think it's so, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys encouraging women to dress like women and men to dress like men. And it's really been a blessing to me.
You have no idea how much that encourages me, because I'll tell you what, we get a lot of shots. Get a lot of shots. Thank you.